Book 4, The Violet Ray of the Seventh Ray, compromises the original issues from 1972 to 1978 with some additions. And we see the letter B and the letter Y, reminding of the tarot card that has the B and the J on it. But it's more than the tarot card. It's the Baz and Yakyin pillars of Solomonic legend. And to give it an Egyptian sort of flair, we have the winged caduceus there, which also makes you think of those little bits of the sun's corona when there are eclipses. But perhaps we're using the energy and such of an eclipse. Now, I sometimes skip doing an eclipse symbolism or whatever video, but it's certainly something I like to do on occasion. On 71 and 72, we have this mention of the history of early Thelema. And of course, in doing that, there's the reminder that the opinions that are conveyed in it are not necessarily that of the Ordo Templi Astartes, because they are different from a Thelemic lodge. Then we open into Adamson's quest, and this quest takes spirituality as something deeper than its social function. And there's preparation before one goes upon the various Kabbalistic pathways. And it's to cure or heal oneself in certain ways. In the calendar illustration on page 80, water is given as the element for the dark quarter, fire for the bright quarter, air for the warming quarter, in which this video is being recorded, and the cooling quarter gets earth. On page 81, the first plane of manifestation is laid flat, and while standing, we got that Osiris slain position. I mean, that's really what it is. It's not risen or something. It's slain. But it's showing within and, the auspicious of their order. But it shows the aspect of having somebody else lead you to become the passive vessel. So you die in a way in order to receive the information. Whether a secret society or not, it's important to keep things legal and to differentiate between a magic lodge and the, political function that its members would take part in. Secrecy, therefore, is not to cover up lies or what is wrong. It's part of the careful construction of consciousness. The fact that things are, surprising to an extent, or at least, you don't know until you know. And, people would pick it apart and overanalyze it instead of working with the system if it was just fully available to the public. Lesser shape rituals are something that works on specifics. Like we can have the devil, temperance, and death. as something we are working with a lesser, right? Because if we're referring to a specific, well, then we have a specific falsehood that we're switching to truth. We have something that we're transmuting or changing, some balance that we're specifically trying to address. On page 88, we have a comic about a Christian couple overhearing some ceremonial magic thing going on in an adjacent apartment. But they're, presuming that it's something on TV, right? Some people's mission in life is carried out in their business, particularly if their business has a spiritual end, so they can, well, at least, if you're running some sort of occult shop, it helps that you yourself gain knowledge to help people along their way with what they're purchasing or otherwise. We have Al, Baal, Ashtrut on each side of a triangle, but it forms a hexagram. We have subjective experiences, and some things are only had by one person or another. But there is a projection aspect. I'm not sure when I pressed the button wrong, so if I repeat something. But so we can work together and project things upon the structure of consciousness, and this structure of consciousness can, thereby be worked. But I wouldn't say in the past, 1400 and 30 some odd years, using the lunar calendar, that anybody has had the experience that would be binding upon another in that respect. And that's why I like Enochian so much, is that, you can indulge the mythos in a way that you're going to have your own experience, but there's certain structure to it. And I honestly believe that monotheist or polytheist, you can use it. On page 102, you have a woman calling down the elements, wanting to indulge and bring within the spirit of the seasons. We have some detail that in the Magic of Solomon, it's a little bit different, but we have this idea, he had some, Karapokronian had some gallbladder problems. He wanted to make certain writing of screenplays and articles and all that sort of stuff as realistic, and he wanted to, and he was inspired by some of the magical text of old about what could be one's experience. Now, there's specifics I'm leaving out there, of course. Page 105 has a comic about an ape with a snake, an Ober Khayyam poem which indicates a bit of deviance from Islam by that poet. But, we have our choice, right? But the ape, doesn't understand. But that's the whole thing with ignorance, right? We have the indication that as much as a person can do the work to advance in a system such as the Church of Hermetic Sciences, Ordo Templi Astartes, figuring out certain things and making certain developments can, of course, aid in, this person, deserves a new grade, right? Page 106 conveys regarding Adamson's quest, the mythical landscape of the Kabbalah tree and what sort of environment that would be. And we saw an example in the Rites of Magic DVD of what these tattwa pathworkings are. Now, if I ever become a member and able to see this series, I wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to repeat the meditations for the color and color square things. But, you get an idea of the landscape you're working on that page. Page 107 illustrates the summer solstice rite, which we saw an example of in that Rites of Magic DVD. And, we have love and the pathways and stuff awaken the death, the guy on the altar and all that stuff. But we also, because Isis and Osiris, that impregnation myth, so we have the birth and with the spring equinox, and then we have the marriage that starts the season of love, and then you have the pregnancy, and then you have the, you're building a home, and then you're harvesting for that home, and then you're preparing, for winter and stuff, and old age and death, and then you start again. And there's different ways to break down the seasonal cycle, and they have their seasonal rites book, which I said something about, but it's an interesting reconstruction nonetheless. And in the spirit of that, and Pokronian conveying through poetry his version of the rites, I likewise do the same thing with my seasonal rituals and some other stuff, as I compose poems specifically for that purpose. And, the blood and water, people think of, Jesus and all that sort of stuff. But, of course, that's the incorporation of the female, and specifically, the menstruation and childbirth. But there's other aspects of it too, the merging of the male and the female. And Spirituality does not have to be an aberration with physical reality, or mental reality can be completely in line with the other two, right? As above, so below. Of course, Christianity and Judaism, to a lesser extent, is full of contradictions. And Christianity even said, no more philosophy after us, right? I mean, that's really the Pauline Christian approach, is that after Paul, despite his use of Platonic and Aristotelian and Socratic and pre-Socratic, Stoic, Epicurean, other forms of hedonism, philosophy, that they didn't want anybody else to use philosophy. Page 111 reminds us of, the God form stuff, and the putting on of the headdresses with the particular animals or particular very specific entities that were said to appear in those forms. The zoomorphic head on whatever. But of course, the joke is that Thoth's skinny head, and the other guys is like, how does this guy get this thing on and off, right? Of course, those aren't the words said. Now, if you set up your temple in the city or whatever, just like I used to decorate for the seasons inside, because I, it wasn't surrounded by garden and all that stuff and woods and all that, so it wasn't. But it does help to have your temple in enough natural circumstances that you can be inspired by nature and its different stages. Magic relies on hypnotism, your own bringing stuff out. Certainly the direct experience of beings specifically guiding you step by step along your way doesn't hold up like study and stuff does. And even if we look at the examples of the prophets were people who had to live their lives. Sure, they held back on making certain judgments or whatnot until until they had the revelation or the inspiration by word or dream or vision or however it came. The timing for seasonal rituals doesn't have to be exactly the night of the cross quarters or the solstices or the equinoxes, as long as it's representing that. People who are not in control of themselves spiritually, who are not practiced in certain things, can certainly be disturbed by some movies of, someone's being exorcised or whatever. But when you gain that experience, when you gain that control, the nightmare room, as I call it, it's not an overall problem. Page 119 is as a harvest of the sunset, but it's not just the pair that operates it, but the side character. Now, in Celtic myth, we have the son of the mother as the name of the holiday for a lot of people. And so that's to be considered too. Is it the father and mother make something possible and then the son goes on his mission? Or he knows what he has to do? But he's having a strong reaction to what's going on in the scene. Descent is met with challenges and changes that we must undergo. As long as one keeps to one's principles, one can be involved in politics. And it's fine to rent, but ideally, temple operations should have a goal of finding a permanent location. The male and the female work together rather than in opposition. I mean, unless they want to, right? I'm not sure if the illustration on page 125 is referring to off in uncertainty at night or during the day, but certainly there's a beast of the unconscious that needs dealt with in a precise way. Although you may not know exactly how it plans out, right? Lotan and Ball remind you in a way of the oak and holly kings. Except it doesn't come off so mutual. It's more as brothers fighting. Like the ancient Egyptians and the Babylonians, a person is opened up, you could say, self-divinized, although you don't have to think of yourself as a god, but in comparison to the other beings that people talk about as gods and goddesses, yeah, a person can become that in that sense, because you end up embodying the principles, and it's open not to just kings and stuff, but sometimes it does take a group effort to bring about that sort of thing. Ideally, a magical order should fill itself with people who can go on, possibly, to branch off and lead their own orders, or to extend the order into new chapters. And not everybody can be a leader, and that's nothing wrong too. And I personally would say that that's not the point, that you become leaders, but it's certainly something that a person should prepare for. When we regard the specific cycles of nature and all that, when we choose our magical items, they can affect us in different ways, or that we dedicate our magical items. After the scroll that we see read, the green tablet of Hermes translation that they use, we move on to a picture on page 134 of the sacred marriage of spring. And they are surrounded by the magical circle, and their elements are about to be merged. I think of the Two of Cups. And if this is the age of Aquarius, we can say that the 2 and 10 of Cups would be Mercury in Aquarius. So doubling up on that. The spring equinox is something of totality. It's something of both the active and the passive, and of course the neutral. To make a golem, it helps to know the alphabet and its placement in the cube of space or the body, and to be able to, of course, put in or take out a letter in a certain place, of course, related to its meaning, if the thought form gets out of control, or, one wants to change it some other way. Crowley's Thelema is not entirely compatible with Wicca. It's of a different path, although some say that it influenced Wicca. And some will say that the oracle use is not, telling the future. It's where the mysteries are hidden. If we work with the states of waking and sleeping, we can start to have, that degree of control over the experiences in the extraordinary states. Those out-of-body experiences can be projected inside and outside, and given themes. Lodges shouldn't depend on the personal relationships of those involved. On page 144, with the piece of prose or poetry, I don't remember at the moment, contained, we have the to which we're from and to which we'll return aspect, of course, and how our consciousness is not the same as our body. Let us not be pessimistic. And on page 145, we have a psychiatrist treating a magician and his something beginning when he was quitting smoking. On page 146, Gabriel's depicted as a woman on an island, maybe. There are more important things in mysticism than, the mystic experiences. The attainment of abilities and character development stuff is certainly the higher stage. Let us remember that eccentric and crazy are absolutely not the same thing. I don't know, I'm just trying to pronounce the letters in the illustration on page 150. And, we don't have to sin, per se, to have the depth of experience to cross the boundaries of our limitations. Magically, if it's the art and science of religion, well, religion regulates, then therefore we can't say, well, if it seems necessary, we can violate our principles. We can throw away our good consciousness for a moment in order to accomplish something. In the long run, we can still accomplish this stuff, right? On page 153, we have a couple lamenting the conversion of their kid to Christianity. It's like, oh, well, when we hit puberty, we gain our independent morality and all that other stuff. So our parents no longer actually decide our religion, even though they try to get us to go to church or whatever. Or in this case, the opposite, right? And the person has a halo too, On page 154, Ariel opens the scenery of day from that of night, bearing I don't know what, but Ariel holding the disc. One of the ideas is that the Gnostics and the people that were called the pagans of the period of early Christianity, didn't much like the earth, at least the ones in Southern Europe, that they wanted to do better than the earth rather than working with the earth. There's that, but why the OTO accepted Aleister Crowley so readily may have been, just a live and let live approach towards obtaining an otherworldly tinged sense of knowing. The myth of the Holy Grail is not about vicarious attainment, but one's own development through something inherited from something far older than Christianity, far older than anything we can call Judaism. How do we justify our theology? Do we move aside nature in our constructions? How do others justify their? On page 163, you have somebody who, they had a golem, but the person who studies Torah knows these things better than the person who just wanders off and performs things without knowledge, right? But the trick to subdue the golem is written there. Kenneth Grant revised Thelemic thought. The OTO is something, the OTA is something different than the OTO in that respect. Kenneth Grant moved the spheres that were being worked with when it came to certain things.